welcome to this reading stream about Not the End of the World by Hannah Ritchie. Uh, we are today discussing chapter 8, which is about overfishing, plundering the oceans, and all that comes with it. Yeah, that's just the last full chapter in the book. So next week we will be discussing probably the conclusion, which is also a few pages left after this chapter, like 7 or 8 pages. So yeah, welcome. And if you have any questions, of course, and you are live, then ask them in the live chat. Let's go to the book. Yeah. Oh, I need to switch my scene, of course. There we go. Okay. So overfishing. Let's see. Pillaging the oceans. We will virtually empty the oceans by 2048. So that's the part where she starts the chapter, and Seaspiracy, which is from the same documentary makers as Cowspiracy, which we have dealt with before. And I've highlighted a few bits in the chapter, so not sure if we are going to discuss everything. But I am going to discuss the things with Windrammer again, so welcome back, Windrammer.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, so let's have a look. So finally, the dangers of overfishing in the state. Um, yeah, so okay, so the documentary is making some statements, and many of the statements are falsehoods. We've discussed this before. Cowspiracy has this very similar kind of problems. Lots of well, falsehoods being made to push a certain agenda. In that case, it was a vegan agenda. In this case, it is something similar, I suppose. I haven't seen Seaspiracy myself. Um, I'm not against vegans, by the way. So when I say vegan agenda, then it does sound a bit as if I'm against that, but I'm not. If you're a vegan, all power to you. But yeah, let's not delve into falsehoods to make your point. If you want to make a point, be honest about it. Um, so yeah, the it actually comes from an earlier research by, I lost his name, Boris Worm. Yes, in 2006, who produced a paper um, that had all kinds of things in it, but it was a very small bit at in the conclusion where he says that if we extrapolate the current development, then by 2048 we'll see a global collapse of all taxa currently fished in the mid 21st century. By the mid 21st century. So yeah, that's not exactly. If people hear that, what do you think, Windrammer? If you hear a complete collapse of all the fish registries in the ocean.
Well, after reading this, now I know it's just a lie.
Well, it's not
Oh,
exactly a lie. I mean, if people hear the term, then yeah, the thing that pops up in your mind, the point is also being made here, is that the oceans are going to be completely empty. But that's not exactly what is meant by it, of course. So what is meant by it?
well, they mean that populations will decline all the way up until there's only 10% of the original stock.
Hmm.
But as as Hannah mentions later on, not only that it's going to happen at the current trends. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there are many definitions of collapse, she says. In fisheries science, we will come back to that. But the one that Worm was talking about was that if we, uh, so when the amount of fish we catch falls to 10%, the highest recorded levels of catch in history. So compared to the highest recorded levels of catch in history, it will collapse. But that does not mean that the the amount of fish in the ocean collapses. Those are two separate things. So it's quite a weird quite weird. Hannah says that we would define this based on fish catch rather than the number of actual fish that are left. But we didn't have much data on the abundance of fish in the oceans at the time of Worm's paper. So that was back in 2006. And to understand how well fish populations were doing, we'd measure how easy it was to catch some. So that was the metric that we used because that was the only data that we had at the time. Um, Now, the second big problem regarding this definition of global collapse. So, how Worm got to a projection of global collapse in the middle of the century. He estimated, Hannah says, the state of the world fish stocks based on the data that was available at the time. So I already just said that it wasn't very much at the time. And let's see, you shouldn't have fish stocks. Yeah, okay. So that's uh, yeah. So this is an important point, I think. So back in 2006, he made this conclusion with a projection. So if we have a linear development towards 100%, so all the fish are gone from the ocean, we no longer catch anything. Um, but in reality, that doesn't work. It doesn't work like that, of course. We course correct all the time. We do all kinds of things. Um, and we currently, actually, in Europe at least, have quite a few countries, if not all countries, at least the EU member states, that are catching fish sustainably. So that has changed in the last decade or so. Um, so that's just a swift introduction to where this number came from, where this idea comes from, that we are fishing the oceans empty. Um, let's see. So let's cue the second person, a giant in his fields, as Hannah says, Ray Hilborn, which has been a researcher for decades as well, and has been winning prizes for academic work since the 1970s. He called that work from Worm that we were just mentioning incredibly sloppy and mind-bogglingly stupid. So that's quite an way to phrase that, of course. Um, and so the point is this happens all the time, everywhere, basically, and it is something you have to be aware of. Is that data is not neutral. There is no such thing as just data, right? So Worm and Hilborn saw the problem differently. Where Worm comes from is from a marine ecologist perspective. So a simplistic view, Hannah says, of marine ecology might be that they want ecosystems to turn back towards a pristine state before humans came along. And fishery scientists, that Ray Hilborn is, focus on how much we can maintain a healthy ecosystem while at the same time catching as much fish as possible. So that's a different perspective. Um, so, yeah, they were both invited and in an NPR public show, public radio. The journalists were hoping for a feisty debate, but that didn't happen. These are two scientists that just had a disagreement, and they were actually having a lot in common. So they worked on a data set that was actually helpful in determining how much fish there actually is in the ocean. Um, they worked a bit on that for a few years. And by 2009, they had all the data they needed to make some conclusions. So, what are your ideas so far from this on this,
Well,
if any?
be honest, yeah, to be honest, I didn't think much of this. Not really something I know about, so I just read it and yeah.
Right. Yeah, I don't know a lot about fishing myself, so it's yeah, but interesting. Lots of information to digest. Um,
Yeah, on the bright side, at least it did spark my interest in this, but yeah,
yeah, that's really what I like about the book. It introduces you to a whole range of topics. That's well, I know a bit about some of the topics, but not about all of these topics. So that's quite interesting. That helpful book in that sense.
yeah,
So the nuance, the actual reality of when the numbers came in, is that on average there was no decline in fish stocks. What they did find was different results across different regions. Some stocks were doing well, were increasing in fact, others were struggling and were a cause of concern. So, on average, there was no clear change. That was more of a stabilization. Um, Here we see a graph. So, the oceans will not be empty by 2048. And we see here the extrapolated line that Worm was making in 2006. And then we see the actual data from 2009 when they actually search for it, what is actually happening in the ocean. So then I've highlighted a little quote. So negative news sells, positive news can occasionally sell, and neutral news with all kinds of caveats and nuances rarely sells. So this, I think, is why we still have this idea that the oceans will be empty by 2050 or by later this century. Because the 2006 news, that became headline news. But when all the data actually came in and the picture was actually quite nuanced and different, that wasn't really a story that was going to be sold, so it wasn't going to be published. And this is why Hannah says the empty oceans by 2048 falsehood was repeated in 2021 in Seaspiracy. Um, yeah, so she actually thinks that the makers of Seaspiracy have some good intent. I'm not sure about that, but sure. But we still have this meme that the oceans are going to be empty later this century. So then we get to the part of the chapter where Hannah explains how we got to now. And well, she delves in all kinds of topics, rise and fall of whaling. So regarding the whaling, how did the whales weren't killed out of malice, she says. People were trying to find a source of energy. And, as it turned out, whale oil was the best they had. So this is interesting because this is another example how the invention of something that we now consider evil, the fossil industry, um, actually helped save the whales because whales were comparatively more expensive to hunt on and sell, etc., than just getting oil out of the ground and process that and used for all kinds of products. that it was
By the
interesting.
way,
Hmm.
by the way, that 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 you just said, maybe that's a reason why we're not going to replace fossil fuels with biomass. Just saying.
I know. So if you want to turn back the clock of time and say, well, we are going to get rid of fossil fuels and go back to the 19th century or whatever, then whaling is back on the table. I don't know. I'm not sure if environmentalists are going to be happy about that, but that's a logical conclusion, of course. To me, at least to me, it's a logical conclusion. Uh, I mean,
Yeah,
the same.
I,
Yeah,
I,
sorry.
I meant, I meant more in the general energy density thing.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. So at the time, whale oil was especially used for lighting, but it was used for all kinds of products. Um, Apparently, it's still being used in Chanel number 5 in perfume. I didn't know that. So, yeah, I'm not sure how
I,
Chanel number 5 can actually be made with whale substances because you can't hunt on them anymore, but okay.
I think the Japanese still do catch them, but I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
they catch them for scientific purposes.
Oh yeah.
Very scientific. Uh-huh. Yeah. Um, mhm. Let's have a look. So yeah, by the 1960s, whale populations become has become increasingly depleted. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the scarcity, and that's the economic argument that Hannah makes. So the scarcity of whales made them too expensive to hunt them because they were just too hard to find to catch. And there were increasingly cheaper and more accessible alternatives for cosmetics, foods, textile industry, etc. So fossil fuels had started to replace whale oils. Um, and this created the material circumstance that the International Whaling Commission was able to impose a global moratorium on hunting whales in 1987. If the oil industry wasn't able to replace those whale products, then that moratorium would never have existed, I think. Um, yeah, so again, we've seen this early in the book, and the chapter on biodiversity. But here again, we see the point that is being made that especially the largest whales were the prime targets. So the minke whale, if I pronounce it correctly, saw just a fall of 20%. But the blue whale, the biggest one, saw its population being cut almost to extinction. So a drop of 98.5%. Huge drop. And it will take many generations for them to replenish their numbers because the bigger the organism is, the slower the reproduction cycle is also. So this is probably going to take centuries to recover. Um, well done, humanity. Uh, let's see. So next bit, the history of fishing. Danger of
Humans
fish.
try not to kill megafauna, level impossible.
Exactly, right? We've killed so much already. So under the heading, the history of fishing, we see a bit of text. As we'll see, many countries have learned how to manage their fish stocks much more sustainably. Endangered fish stocks have made a comeback, but unmonitored and unregulated fishing techniques are increasing across some parts of the world. So, essentially, we are sustainable. We can be sustainable where we have to be it because the fishing stocks have depleted too much, or because of regulation, or a combination of those. But when we can plunder, when we can hunt without restrictions, we will do that. So you see these European fishing fleets going to Africa, and they just plunder the whole sea over there and just sell it back in Europe. It's an awful practice, really. Um, yeah, so same thing happening there. What was happening here? Sustainable where we have to be, but plundering where we can. Hmm. Imperialism, yay. Um, so where we are today is the next bit of the chapter. So we're having a good pace, huh? So the chapter is a bit shorter than normal. So let's see how unsustainable have our fishing habits actually really become. Sounds like a simple question, but it racks up a whole lot of controversy. Controversy. So yeah, so what is sustainable? That's the question that is being asked here. And here we come back to the two schools that we just mentioned. So the ecological school that is often adopted by environmentalists that says, well, if we assume that humans are have stopped fishing the oceans entirely, and the fishing quota, the fishing population stock can come back to their natural sizes, then how big would that actually be? And the other school is, of course, um, the commercial school that says, well, they view it as catching as much fish as possible without depleting the populations any further. So this meets the classic Brundtland definition of sustainability. We catch as much fish as possible to meet the needs of the people today, but we don't take so much that it would sacrifice catch for future generations. Um, I tend to agree with this last school of thinking regarding sustainability. What do you think?
I actually disagree a little. Personally, I think a better definition for sustainability and considering fish stocks already have fell considerably. Like we already saw not a disaster, but they did fell. I will say that a better definition will be catching enough.
Right. So, what would sustainability be in that case? What would it look like in
It
your
it will
view?
be it will be catching just enough so that the stocks can still increase. So it will be by a little bit, like maybe a few percentages, but I will say that will be a better definition. Of course, that will need a lot of data to follow exactly how many fish there are. But yeah,
Hmm. Okay. So, still fish, um, but do it below the sweet spot of fishing to sustainable levels, so you don't overfish. So the population can grow back to their natural size over time. That's what you're saying then,
yes, exactly.
right? Okay, oh, fair enough. That's one way to look at it, sure. But we get to a third option later on in the chapter. Let's see. Yeah, that's where we get now. So we now farm more fish than that we catch. Um, yeah, so how is it, Hannah says, that we have managed to put a pause on the number of fish populations that are being overexploited. But on the other side, since the 1990s, that we have had a huge explosion of seafood production. That is more than doubled. So the solution to this is that we actually farm a lot of fish these days. Not all fish, but a lot of it. And here's this graph. The world now produces more seafood from fish farming than wild catch. That actually aquaculture has overtaken wild catch since about 2010, by the looks of this graph. So yeah, that's a huge number. Um, and the other thing is that many iconic fish species are now healthy and sustainably managed. So in the past there was this big thing about the world's tuna. So the tuna was going to be a fish to extinction. It's a big fish. You wouldn't say it's actually a big fish, but it's actually like I believe like 3 meters in size. It's a really big fish, um, but it's only you only see the little cans in the shop, of course. um, but yeah, so but the tuna has uh, has dropped over time, but eventually it bounced back across Europe and North America. Um, let's see, became from near threatened to least concern on the list of endangered species. She doesn't say when that happened. And other
By the
species
way,
are,
is
yeah,
yeah, by the way, and following with what you said earlier about foreign fishers going to places where there's less regulations, we have a problem here with foreign boats that come here to fish tuna,
really.
and then they just go, yeah, like they come here, they fish it, and then they just leave. Like they don't even pr produce it here. Like leave the fish here and then export it to other countries. Rather, they fish it and then they just leave. And legislation passed like 4 years ago, but there's still a problem because there's nothing to enforce it
Hmm.
because we don't really have a navy. So yeah,
Yeah, you don't have something like a coast guard or something like that,
we we do, but it's nothing like the Coast Guard of the US, for example.
right? Yeah, it's always one way. Yeah, so these fishing boats are often coming from the United States or bigger countries like Mexico or something.
Uh,
But
I'm not
the
sure actually. I'm not sure. Like at least here in Costa Rica, I'm not sure exactly what's the share of countries. I've heard there's quite a bit of Chinese boats, but
oh, could also be
I'll be
sure.
yeah, but I'll be lying if I said that it's mostly from this or that country. I'm not sure exactly what's the
Yeah, and
share.
the flags that they are sailing under doesn't necessarily represent the country where they're coming from, because that also has all kinds of tax implications. So it's
Yeah,
a
that's
flag of
true.
convenience. So that's a lot of countries are still sailing under Panama flag, I believe, because they have a very good tax culture, if they have any
Yeah.
tax at all. um, let's see. So yeah, the point I was trying to make was it's always a one way trip, right? So they wherever they come from, China, USA, whatever, had their fishing boats will come, but they're enforcers for the law. They stay at home. So you have to fend for
Yeah,
yourself. You have to defend your own waters, etc.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, that is an issue that Hannah's also raising. So unfortunately, not every country invests in this level of monitoring that we see in North America and Europe. So we have large data gaps across many parts of Asia, Africa, and South America, and I suppose Central America. Central America is always forgotten in this book. I'm not sure why.
yeah. We do a lot of legislation on fish, but the enforcement is another thing. Like for example, it's easy to enforce fishermen that are based here in Costa Rica because they pay taxes here, they disembark here, etc. But it's not
Right.
so easy with foreign boats.
Um.
Like for example,
Yeah.
we ban fishing with nets. We only allow with lines, fishing lines.
Hmm. So fishing rods. So like doing it manually.
Right. Yes.
Right. Okay. Interesting. So officially, commercial fishing would not be possible in Costa Rica's waters.
Technically, yeah.
So all these fishing boats are actually illegal then in Costa Rica's waters.
I'm not sure exactly what the legislation says. Like, for example, the latest legislation around tuna was that they would still be allowed to fish, but they had to disembark the fish here in Costa Rica so that we could count them and
Hmm.
they could pay taxes. And yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So they never dock anywhere in Costa Rica, of course.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh well. So the next bit in the chapter is regarding the coral reefs, which are getting bleached to death for various reasons. So a number that struck me was that corals only cover about half a percent of the ocean floor, yet they support almost 30% of the world's marine fish species, and that's a really big number. Um, yeah, so she explains why they are getting bleached, and that's it's a combination of the water getting warmer, uh, acidification is an issue because the oceans actually pull a lot of CO2 from the atmosphere, and because of this, that the oceans get more acidic. Um, so she explains that a bit, how that works. But yeah, it's corals are a living entity, a living animal, and they are um, part of the phylum of the Cnidarians, which I'm not pronouncing correctly, probably, which is apparently a group of 11,000 water-based animals, um, which built a calcium carbonate exoskeleton. So they pull that from the water. And here we see another problem with acidification, that exoskeleton is actually dissolving under more acidic circumstances. So these coral reefs are actually really impacted with acidification. Um, let's see. What has changed is that, yeah, so she makes a difference between the natural cycles that are already having a pressure on the coral reefs, like the El Nino years, where you have more warm water coming in. Um, the thing is that nowadays, because humanity are are around and we are doing human things, um, the pressures are actually being increased in intensity and frequency. So overfishing, we are pouring sewage, fertilizer into the ocean, and we of course are contributing to the global warming effect, which are raising the temperature and acidification. That's all
By
kind
the
of
way,
that's. Hmm?
about acidification, I wonder, like, for example, the CO2 comes into contact with water and that produces carbonic acid, and that acidifies the water,
Hmm.
and the coral grows on what was it? Mm,
It's calcium carbonate.
calcium carbonate, right? So I think that's also what they use to do carbon capture. What if we turn the CO2 into calcium carbonate and put it into the ocean?
That's actually one way to do it. One of the better ways to acidify the oceans, and at the same time pull a lot of CO2 also from the atmosphere, because there's an equilibrium between the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere and the oceans. So if you are able to chemically store the CO2 in the oceans, then it pulls more CO2 from the atmosphere. So, anyway, that's one way to do that. Another way to do that is um, a mineral called olivine. It's sort of a crystal-like mineral, I believe. But the thing is that it weathers in contact with CO2. It binds the carbon to its molecular structure, and it chemically binds it that way. So I calculated a little while ago that if we would fine grind a whole mountain of olivine of about 800 cubic kilometers. It's a really big mountain, right? It's like more an island, I suppose. And just grind it to dust, sub-millimeter level particles. Then that would bind enough CO2 to actually be able to return to pre-industrial levels regarding CO2 in the atmosphere. It won't happen overnight, of course, because that takes a little time. But over a period of like 1 or 2 centuries, that would actually return to those kind of levels, while at the same time deacidifying the oceans that way. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, but of course, grinding up 800 cubic kilometers of rock actually takes a fuckload of energy. So in the same calculation, I guesstimated that we need about, I believe it was 200 of the biggest nuclear power plants, nuclear reactors that we have currently, and run those for 100 years straight just to have enough power to grind up that amount of rock. It's a ridiculous amount. And if you go, of course, you use dirty energy, so fossil energy to grind up that rock, then that kind of defeats the whole point of grinding the rock, of course. So you're using CO2 to capture CO2. So that's of course solving nothing.
How many reactors? 200.
200, yes, 200 EPR reactors would that be?
I think that's the number of reactors that the US has. Let me check.
The US has about 90 plus right now, and those are averaging about a gigawatt per reactor. So it's about 90 gigawatts that they currently have online. So we at least need, uh, what was it? It was 2,500 terawatt hours per year, but that would be about that's 3.2. It's 320 gigawatts of electricity, of installed electricity.
Interesting. Yeah, it's actually doable.
It's doable, yeah, but it would need to be added to the existing to all the other needs, of course, because we need electricity for all kinds of stuff, of course. Uh, and 320 gigawatts is about three quarters of the total nuclear energy park that we have globally installed right now. That kind of ballpark. Yeah, so it's doable, but we do need to put an effort into that.
Yeah.
So I made a short note for myself regarding the 11,000 water-based number. So it's 11,000 species that are considered to be family of the um, coral reef system. So I was thinking maybe we could actually harvest them, or not harvest them, but have specimen and specimen in a genetically wide variety, right? So we can actually prevent them from going extinct. So if coral would go extinct, then that would that would be bad, right? um, but my thinking was that if we could have some specimen, have them grow in the captivity, if that is at all possible, I'm not sure. Then perhaps at a later stage, if we have solved the CO2 troubles, we can build perhaps new coral reefs, just see them out again once the acidification is done in 100 years or so. I don't know how long that takes.
Yeah, that will be interesting.
Um, So yeah, she stops this bit by the evidence is clear to save the world's coral reefs. We need to stop climate change. Yes, obviously. Um, so and that's why I keep repeating acidification because you could think that if we are going to seed clouds or do other kinds of geoengineering, then we can lower the temperature that way. And it would perhaps help for lowering temperature, but it would not help for de-acidification of the oceans, right? So that's actually an important part of this because if the oceans are too acidic, then we don't have coral reefs to begin with.
Yeah,
Um,
it's worth looking into solutions that maybe are a little more expensive, but to solve a wider range of problems. Like, for example, the other day I was watching this idea of building like a column that goes into the ocean and pulls cold water from below into the surface, and that way it helps, recirculate the heat, but that doesn't fix the heating problem nor the acidification problem. So yeah, it's kind of a one one trick wonder.
yeah, exactly. Um, Let me just check. We don't have any questions in the live stream chat, so let's just continue. We just have a few pages left. Um, so, how do we stop pillaging the oceans? So, eat less fish. That's an obvious one, I think. um, let's see, but many don't want to. Yeah, so many people don't want or can't actually give up fish completely. So a more realistic future, at least in the term, would be to for people to just eat less fish. But they would need a viable alternative, of course. So, what's the fish culture like in Costa Rica?
How
Do
much
you have a fish
fish do
culture?
we eat?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll say that mostly people eat chicken here. We
Right.
we we do eat fish too.
Right.
There's
Yeah. So.
this
Mm?
there's this dish that we make that it's basically raw fish in lemon juice. I don't know if you have tried it.
I haven't. No. Well,
Yeah,
well,
it's actually
we do
quite
have some
tasty.
lemon with some fish that we take, but it is not marinated in lemon juice or something like that. So that would be new for me.
Yeah, and it's raw.
Raw. Okay. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So in the Netherlands, we do have somewhat of a fish culture. It's interesting that we actually um, we we export a lot of fish, of course. So it was. I'm not sure which way around it was anymore, but I think it was like we fished a lot of bigger shrimp that we exported because in the Netherlands we only like the smaller version of the smaller species of shrimp. While in Greece they
Interesting.
like the bigger one, for example. So what was that?
No, I said interesting.
Yeah. Or maybe it was the other way around that we import a lot of the smaller shrimp. That I don't know, but we like the smaller one, and yeah, the bigger one we just export. um, Cultural thing. And of course, we have lots of other fish that we often use. But I'm not entirely. I'm not a big fish eater myself, to be honest. But I suppose that in provinces like Holland and Zeeland, they eat a lot more of it. Um, I don't really. I eat some fish, but not that much. Um, yeah. So the
Yeah,
point that yeah, sorry.
yeah, me neither. I eat like one or two fishes per month at most.
Yeah, about the same. The point that Hannah was making here is that billions of people can't afford a nutritionally complete diet and need to make the most of whatever is available. So if fish is available, then fish it is. And that brings me brings my thinking towards the golden rice debacle. So Greenpeace recently filed a lawsuit in the Philippines uh, against the use of golden rice. So that's genetically enhanced rice that has extra vitamin A in it, and because of that, it's having a yellow color, hence the name. So, uh, yeah, the thing is that someone was responding on Twitter, well, why don't they eat brown rice then? That and I'm like, well, let them eat cake, you know? It's it's such a stupid comment. So if people are going to be bound by white rice because that is the cheapest thing that is available or the only thing that is available, then white rice it is. So golden rice would actually be a big improvement if you don't have access to vegetables like carrots that have vitamin A in them naturally. Um, if you don't have that available, or if it is too expensive, then you're not going to eat carrots. Um, and only eat rice or mostly eat rice and have all kinds of nutritional deficiencies. So thank you, Greenpeace, for actually. I mean, there was this. I don't know if you saw it, but there was this article by the Guardian of all places that published today or yesterday. That was like we are going. Greenpeace is. Let me just find it. I just posted about this.
Well, you find
Uh,
it
mhm.
the lack of vitamin A is a big deal too because people can go blind from that.
Right, or actually be killed because of that. because of
Yeah.
deficiency. So here we are. I think if I switch to this, it doesn't work. Okay, and let's. Okay, so let me just fiddle bit this a bit because I do want to show this. Hmm. There we go. Okay, so here we see the article by The Guardian. So, a catastrophe, Greenpeace blocks planting of life saving golden rice. Thousands of children could die after court backs campaign group over GM crop and Philippine scientists warn. So, this was just published today. So, you can find it if you like. And it's just awful. If why is Greenpeace doing this? I don't understand.
Kind of weird that the Philippines will side with Greenpeace, to be honest.
To be honest, yes, I agree. It's really odd that they do that. Um, yeah, maybe they have some good lobbyists from Greenpeace. I don't know why they do that.
Yeah,
Um,
or maybe Greenpeace knew how to appeal to the crazy conspiracies.
I don't know. I don't know. So, which fish should we eat? Hannah asks. So many of our favorite seafood dishes, this was something I found interesting, have actually a lower carbon footprint than chicken, which is the most climate friendly kind of land meat, land based meat. Um, so, yeah, that was surprising a bit to me, actually, that seafood is even less uh, carbon dense than chicken is. Although I don't, it doesn't really surprise that much. Hmm. Well, um, yeah, stop overfishing by implementing strict quotas. That would be obvious, I think. So the EU actually made a lot of progress in the last decade or so. So in 2007, when overfishing reached its peak, 78% of the region's fish stock were overfished, and by 2020, just 30% were. So it's not quite the goal that was had to be achieved. The goal was 0%, but that's still a lot of progress, I think, in just 13 years. So we can replicate this result elsewhere, I think, with some, what do you call that, extra investments in being able to enforce rules, etc.
Yeah,
Um, Although I do think that the EU has a responsibility, United States as well, by the way, to actually enforce those rules of their fishing fleets. If they go to Africa or wherever the hell, then they should be abiding the law as well. And if they don't, then they get fined. It's a possibility that the EU
yeah,
has. I'm not sure if that they do, but it's a possibility.
yeah. That's a fair opinion, I think.
Yeah. Oh, right. So, yeah, there was the comments regarding the so-called discards. So, globally, around 10% of the animals we catch are discarded, thrown overboard. So, is 10% a lot? Is it's not that much? So, back in the 1960s, it was 20%. So, there is progress going on. Then again, we do fish a lot more since then. But there has been progress on this point. So back in the EU again, um, there is a policy where fishermen may not discard any fish, so any bycatch, they have to keep it on board. So either they're going to sell it or whatever. But the point is that if they have to keep it on board, then of course they don't have enough room for other fish. But also, um, there's a fish quota system in the EU, so you may only get a certain amount of living animals, living organisms, biomass from the sea. And if you have that quota, then if you reach that quota, then you're done fishing, right? Um, gets renewed every year, I believe. And so there's an incentive for these fishermen to, mostly men, sometimes women, um, to actually well, catch the right fish, right? The fish they want. So there's all kinds of investment and innovations on better netting, etc., to get the stuff that they want and not the stuff that they don't want. um, and then there is an in your neck of the woods in Belize. They are leading the way and have banned the use of fishing gear that is not selective for specific fish at all. So that's interesting. That's also interesting. Global fish discords. Well, okay, so here we have a graph. So about the global fish discords. So we see it trending downward. However, over the last decade or so, we see a stabilization. So it could be better. And then we get to the last bit of the chapter, things to stress less about. Yeah, so here's we see a graph. Many fish can be a low carbon source of protein, and we see all kinds of well, sea animals, both wild and farmed. And we see that the farmed one actually tend to have a lower carbon footprint overall than even the wild catch. So that's interesting. I was expecting it to be the other way around because you need some kind of, I think, energy input. But then again, I suppose fishing ships are quite polluting in themselves. Not entirely sure what's happening there.
Yeah, same. I also thought that farmed will have higher carbon footprint, but that's nice actually.
Yeah, so we need to do more farming then, if at all possible. So yeah, fish like tuna and herring. So herring is the popular fish here, of course, in the Netherlands. Um, those I don't think they can't be they can be farmed at all because they need to swim thousands of kilometers or something like that. So those are limitations. But yeah, other fish are
Here
easily
we
farmed. Hmm?
here we eat a lot of tilapia, but
Oh right.
that's interesting. It has a higher carbon footprint than salmon, and personally, I think salmon is much more tastier. Yeah,
It's also more expensive, I think, isn't it? At least for here it is.
Y- yeah. And actually, I don't know any place where I can buy farmed salmon. The only salmon that I've seen, it's wild and comes from Chile.
Hmm. It's interesting that indeed the wild salmon is has a bigger footprint than the farmed one. Hmm. It's like a 25-ish% difference. That's interesting. But farmed fish, a solution that seemed icky. Uh, so it's not just let's do it all farming. Um, So many people have this idea that if you have a farmed fish, then therefore it is bad or worse than the natural variation, which is of course the nature fallacy. So if it comes from nature, then it has to be good. There are lots of things coming from nature that kills you, but whatever. um, and this is this is sort of the end of the chapter. So there's an aquaculture production has been decoupled from the use of wild fish for feed. So at the start of the aquaculture revolution, I suppose, in the 1990s, there was a lot of wild fish feed used to raise the fish in the aquaculture. So that actually was so much that it made no sense, economically speaking, to do this at all, unless you want very specific fish. But eventually, we got way more efficient at this, and we no longer use as much, or well, we do use some wild fish for animal feed. So that's the bycatch, I suppose. But yeah, it has dropped a lot. At least it has stabilized regarding the production, but relatively speaking, it has dropped a lot.
Yeah,
All
it's
right.
completely decoupled to like the aqua production is going up exponentially with while the wild fish is going down.
Yeah, it has more or less
Completely
stabilized. It
decoupled.
hasn't really been going down in absolute terms. Um, but yeah. All right. Did you have any more notes on this pretty short chapter?
No, those were all of them.
All right. Then next week we have the last bit, the conclusion, which is only 7 pages. So I think we're. I haven't read it yet, so maybe we're going to have a very long discussion about it. But I suspect we'll be done pretty quickly. So yeah, do you have anything to say to when going out?
No, that will be all of it.
All right. Then thanks for watching the stream and see you next week. Bye.
Bye bye.